My name's Doug Baulos. Can you all hear me okay? I'm a professor at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. And welcome to the Gadsden Museum of Art on this Saturday. I'd like to thank everyone for being here this afternoon. It's a treat to me to get to ask questions of three of the most interesting artists in Alabama. They are all both highly lauded and exhibit their work both regionally, nationally, and deservedly so. I'm so excited to welcome and speak with Daisie Hoitsma, Stacy Holloway, and Sara Garden Armstrong, who has an exhibition downstairs and is currently being exhibited here. Thanks to Roy and the entire staff of the GMA for arranging this, and thanks to everyone attending today. I'm gonna put my glasses on, and I have my large print notes, which they have already mocked me incessantly about. And today we're gonna talk about, in general, the idea of what expanded practice is and how these three artists have kind of responded to materials and their studio practice. All three artists have a deep commitment to exploring a very incredibly broad variety of materials, equipment, techniques, and forms free of imposed ideologies, in my opinion. Some of the expanded practice that these three have explored include casting, performance, identity, environments, interactivity, installation art, laser cutting, place, ecology, social practice, materiality, in all very radically different styles. So Daisie, I'm gonna ask you a question first. And just a note, we will take questions from the audience. Like sometimes I think it's better to ask a question during the discussion instead of holding till the end. Daisie, can you talk about how your studio practice has evolved and been complicated over time? I feel especially like when I see your drawings that you have almost single-handedly created your own language or another language of drawing, even though I'm calling them drawings, and you might want to talk about that.
Thank you. I love that. I think for a long time I was trying to find kind of a place to put my work, and so I thought initially like, oh, I'm a printmaker, or no, I'm a painter. I was trying to kind of find a way in, and so ultimately I feel like the drawing is the best kind of home for me because I feel like everything is drawing in a sense, and so my work as a whole focuses on the idea of time and how I'm the same person I was when I was 8, and all those memories and experiences are part of me, and I'm the same person. But also I feel like I've been through several portals since then, and I've evolved drastically, and so my work is just an attempt to document each phase and each kind of experience as it evolves and progresses naturally. So while the work may look really different, I feel like that drawing as a whole is the best kind of description for them. And I love the idea, I guess, that, you can go to the beach and pick up a stick or something and make a drawing in the sand, and we would all say, hey, that's a drawing, but maybe radically different than the traditional idea of it.
Do you maybe want to talk about the show you're curating for the Alabama Contemporary that is drawing, and how that is going to embrace that language?
Yes. So I'm curating a show at the Alabama Contemporary. There's 6 artists, and Sarah's one of them. I'm one of them. And then there's some artists from Virginia and Los Angeles. And so the name of the show is Drawing in Space. It'll be up this summer. And it's the idea of drawing as expanded practice. So no longer just 2-dimensional, but also kind of 3-dimensional, and basing it off the idea of to drawing as a verb, that to draw something is to pull something, and we might think of that as a utensil across the surface, but the idea of just pulling anything is kind of what I keep going back to.
Do you want to talk about like what your work looks like in exhibitions, since some of them might not be familiar with it? Like what are materials you use or that you're gravitating towards right now?
Oh, yeah. I keep going back a lot to graphite and ink, kind of as my mainstays always. But lately, the kind of projects I've been working on, I collaborate a lot with my children. And so there's these photos that my son, who's now 8, has been taking on and off for a few years. And so I'll take a photo, or one of his photos that he took, and then I'll draw back into it.
How did that all start?
I guess just kind of naturally, in the sense that when he was a toddler, I was looking at how he would take kind of what I might consider utilitarian things around the house, and he would kind of use them as toys and kind of reinvent them as a function or as a shape or as a something kind of enticing for himself. So I started looking at what his toys were and trying to reinvent them as something enticing for myself, as a way to kind of have a natural give and take. And then and then for a while, there was kind of a period of, or a series of works where I would take his drawings and layer my drawings in on top, and then he would draw back in on top of my work. Because for a while, he's very expressive and free with his work, so it kind of worked really well. He's 8 now, so he's a lot more kind of literal in kind of his expectations. And so he likes to take a photo that he feels like is a good photo, and then I can put on what I think is a good drawing, and we're both happy. So.
It's interesting to think about like why artists go into expanded practice, and like, you know, like I can't even imagine juggling motherhood and an artistic career. But, you know, often I talk about like the invisible labor that some artists have to deal with, and it seems like it's an interesting way to kind of complicate your artistic practice, if that makes sense.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, I think that.
And you've kind of used a lot of different material sources when you have responded to him, which is interesting too.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
I agree. Thank you. Yeah, I think that in some way, maybe when we're starting out as a student, all right, I guess I'm just speaking for myself. When I was starting out as a student, you feel kind of a pressure to isolate your artwork from other things. And then even when you have these things going on in your day-to-day life, you're like, oh no, I'm trying to do a really good job on my projects and on my work or something. And I think that that's a really kind of artificial way of thinking about it, because it's the complexities of our life that give depth and meaning to our work. And so they can only exist, you know, intrinsically and layered within each other. And so to kind of try to isolate them is problematic. So just by kind of embracing them for what they are and pursuing them is kind of the richest way for both, I think.
Sounds good. Stacy, can you talk a little bit about your expanded practice and where it draws its inspiration from, and maybe where it's going? Your work encompasses a keen sense of the history of craft, but also embraces a very wide variety of materials at the same time sometimes in installation.
Hello, thank you. Thanks, Gadsden Museum and Ray, for having us and hosting this too. But yeah, I actually went to art school as a realistic painter. And then I had a 3D design class. I had some screws I got too long of screws and they stuck out of my piece. And then somebody gave me a grinder and I made sparks and I was like, this is what I want to do forever. So, but it actually turned out to be really the best avenue for me, because I always thought of sculpture as not being limited to any material. So, and so much so that when I was in undergrad, since we're talking about being students, if I needed something, a texture or something to symbolize something, I actually used to work at Michael's Arts and Crafts in the frame shop, and I would volunteer to sweep the studio, like the whole store. So I had to go up and down every aisle, and I was like, oh, would that work? And I'm holding up glasses to my eyes and stuff like that. So I think that I just kind of started thinking of, I need to create a specific scene. I call them scenes because I'm a big movie buff, mostly like really bad, cheesy 80s and 90s horror movies. I wanted to be like work for Robert Rodriguez and Quentin Tarantino, making the severed body parts and stuff. But so just like anything can be the material. And so what you're talking about, the crafts, I do know how to do traditional woodworking, metal casting, stuff like that. But to me, it's really important what I want that end product to be. So 2018, I wanted a bowl in a china shop, and it had to be real china, real ceramics. And there's a reason why I made that imagery, because that's what my parents called me. I was a super klutz. So everything, I am a terrible ceramicist, anything that breaks easily, it's really bad for me. But I did my best, and there was, quite a few of them that I had to glue back together for the show, because it was quantity, not quality sometimes. But so I think I just I'm hoping someday that I need to do something that's hand knitted or crocheted, so I can actually learn how to do that, because I won't pay attention to something unless I need it for my artwork. So I just take a lot of what I see, I like this in craft, and I'm going to learn how to do that. So lots of YouTubing, and so whatever it needs to be, I just investigate it. Or sometimes when, as a professor, this is both you guys, is that you just have to learn something that you may not know that one of your students is interested in too. So I'm always like, let's learn it together. I don't know how to do that, but we can do it together. So I don't know if I answered your question or not.
It's good. It's just a moderated panel.
Yeah.
No one's on trial.
Yeah.
I love that at first Sara put I was the mediator, not the moderator, and I was like, okay, I'm not. This is not a cat feed that I'm mediating. It's so funny. But I think I've known Stacy the longest.
10 years. Yeah.
And I remember when she first got there, she'd be like, Doug, do you want to come do a knitting demo or a sewing demo? And I was like, okay, it's interesting. But to me, all the best teachers are great students, and all the best students are great teachers. And I do feel with your work, sometimes it's almost mind-blowing how many materials and how many processes you're able to juggle very successfully, which is really cool. But also you seem to have a really good beginner mind kind of
that's what I was
idea
gonna
behind
say.
it.
Yeah, I was gonna mention that most people don't try something new because they can't get started.
Yeah.
And I was always the kid that would jump headfirst in that shallow, just don't care, don't know what's in front of me, but I'm going to try it, and I'm going to do it right. No baby steps, just jumping in. So I think that sometimes is what you need to do. But of course, if you're working with materials and stuff that are really expensive, or it's a really big installation, of course, do the maquettes, which this woman is wonderful at doing, the little maquettes. I love them. But just try, get started. And then for me, that's always been once I'm started, I have OCD, so I am invested. I am obsessed until it's done. So, yeah.
And just, do you find there's a lot of times when people talk about creativity in general, it becomes this whole kind of not sublime thing at all, but I just love your creative energy, if that makes sense. And I think that ties into beginner mind, and also just this idea that I'm going to make it work no matter what.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there's a lot of, times where some colleagues will come in, they're like, oh, I didn't know you knew how to do that. I'm like, I don't. We're going to see what happens. And sometimes it's bad, but just mess up, and that's how, now I know I'm klutzy with ceramics. I'm not good at it. I know, but I'm good with metal casting, and, so, you learn what you like and what you don't like, but, because now if there's something that I don't like to do, I'll just find somebody who can do it and pay them to do it and put it in my installation. So, yeah.
Cool. Sara told me that my question for her is very convoluted. But Sara also uses a wide variety of materials and processes, as well as technology, which takes a lot to, as far as expanded thing goes. I think that's one of the things that's a big hurdle for me, because I don't do that. I'm very 19th century in my work. I don't even use electricity most of the time. But how does your use of materials and ideas, does it break with established conventions or embrace them, do you think?
I think it does both, but I'm going to take back on the thing with the maquettes and doing, like I do maquettes and I do models, and an atrium commission that I had, I did a model and it was accepted. I had no earthly idea how to build it though. So, that just, it gives you problems, and like money. Mm-hmm. But I think we all sort of do go and get what we need, mm-hmm. and find out how. I do not really ever have an image of what something's going to completely look like. I end up progressing slowly with trying to figure it out, and I'm always searching. And the same thing with the paintings, the sculpture, and I do know when I've gotten it, and it is a hunt with materials and technology. One of the pieces, the back piece that has the light downstairs, that was done in the 90s, early 90s, and it was very different. But I knew I wanted to use it here, and so, but there's so much with light that has now been done and changes, so much more. So the LED strip. I am not that great at knowing all of this, but I definitely know how to find the people that can help with it. And I don't mind, I will spend money ordering all different types of samples and see what will happen. And you sort of slowly build that up. So yes, I like technology, but I'm not a tech person. And I use it. And a lot of the sort of breathing down there is, I've always worked with people, and or had friends and go, like the sort of X and Y piece down there, the two side by side sort of caskets. I became friends with somebody in the robotics lab at NYU way back there, and that's how I got the connection of the blowing and the sucking and the blowing. He was just so smart, and so there's just so many great people out there that sort of help you figure out what it is. And I don't ever really become, I'm not efficient at it. I'm not going to be an electronics person because I need so many different things for different pieces going in different directions. Now tell me what some more of the question was there.
I think it's really interesting because, like we all have very complicated studio practices. And one of the things I talk about, like when I'm in other states exhibiting, is like people don't realize that y'all exist in Alabama in a way. And to me, like it's one thing to go to a museum, but we're talking about expanded practice, and like I really love that I've met all of y'all and been able to do like studio visits or talk to you outside of exhibitions, because sometimes those generate the most interesting discussions. And I literally met Sara because someone told her to call me at one point to find out how to do something. And like
you got me the person to work with me.
Yeah. And but like artist houses are really interesting to visit, and artist studios are really interesting to visit, because like Sara, we're all site-specific installation artists, kind of, in radically different ways, but man, they're all really so different. But how do you guys feel about like expanding your artistic careers beyond museums or into other possible? Sara always gets mad at me because I don't document my work. Like she is just like, what? And she does. I don't make maquettes. I make these crazy gibberish lists and drawings, but I don't make maquettes.
But that's your way of sketching.
Yeah.
It's my way of seeing and realizing something, because sometimes I'm trying to climb a mountain that I don't know how to climb.
We all are trying to climb that mountain.
But I think that's interesting for us to talk about.
That we but you don't know. You're trying to see. I'm always trying to see.
Yeah.
And how do you see? For me, it is making those models, changing them. Then when you get in the space, you continue to change. You just hope you have enough time to make it work.
Yeah.
Well, and I just wanted to go off of what Sara was saying, is that sometimes you don't need somebody who's a specialist in something. Sometimes you're like, I need a motor that runs slow. I'll just go to Walmart and get one of these little turkey roasters or something, like rotisserie chicken. That's what it is. So, or like what, I try and think what exists already that does what I need it to do.
Yeah, I understand. Well, and you do. I mean, like I had with the one, I had to blow up a glue gun. How was I going to blow the glue gun up? And finally, it was gel medium on glass that I would wrap.
Yep.
But it's just, you know.
You had to blow a glue gun
you
up?
blow it up. Yeah.
Oh, make it bigger.
Make it bigger.
Oh, okay,
No, excuse me.
Doug, monumentalism, not actually explosion.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to ask you guys about is that we all kind of work in series, not the same way. But can you talk a little bit about how you build your like major exhibitions, like solo exhibitions in large spaces, and how do you decide what is included in those exhibitions and how the viewer's going to be involved?
I think you should talk about yours down there. You know, that's
okay. Well, so, you know, this is the last stop for this show. So I've had the experience of 6 different spaces. This is the 6th. And it has been really interesting thinking about, so the spaces were from a very, sort of the Berry College, which is about this size, to 8,000 square feet. So those spaces, and then the 8,000 square feet was a warehouse without wall. I mean, it had walls, but you didn't want to emphasize the walls. So it's in here is just they're just so different that you really had to think about how and what work, and how was the sound, how was the movement, how was the all the things, how it would move around. And so again, I did models, not at first because I was so rushed at that, but I did drawings and just trying to get to understand it. And then you are going to change it when you're in the space because there's a physicality about the space. And it's been great getting to have this experience and to understand, you know, to think about what could work and what couldn't work. But this body of work is over from 1978 to today. So it was a lot.
Daisie, you want to talk a little bit?
Yeah, I guess, so my series, I'll usually start off with a whole bunch. Like, I think, like, I'm going to have, I have 20 pieces of paper. I'm going to make this series about whatever it is I'm thinking about or something. But at some point, it just kind of naturally breaks off, and you realize that this one doesn't fit with the others as a family, as it makes sense. And so you just kind of have to set it aside, and it becomes something else. It becomes like this offshoot, and that's the start for something else. Or you need more. You know, the opposite could happen. You have to keep building more and more because you haven't said it all yet. But I think as far as shows, you know, I tend to have a show that, like, I feel like is based off of a project or a series of works. And then either, I guess usually there's more space than that fits that one. So then I figure out which project kind of complements it and how they can kind of coexist together as far as building the work. But I guess I also really love 2-person shows. So my husband and I show together a lot. He's a sculptor. And so there's kind of a fun dance that happens as far as like which works are speaking to each other and where we could put them together. It's just really beautiful. I think kind of the idea of seeing him in a different way and seeing his work in a different way, but then also using it as a way to think of my works in a different way, I guess. So.
Stacy?
I tend to think of my piece, in the last 10 years, I've been trying to make big installations that can come apart and become something else. So a single installation doesn't really get set up the same way, probably very similar to Sara in the space, in a different space. So it's like that installation only lives for the duration of the exhibition I think. And then once it comes down, these are all parts that I can then play with and take like this from this other installation, put them together and do all this fun stuff together. But I think for a while now, I've been working kind of within the same conceptually different ideas, but aesthetically all similar, so that everything went together. So sometimes it's like, okay, I got to show what do I have done, and then you start with like, well, this is the biggest piece, and this is the only place where it can go, and then just kind of place stuff around it and see what happens. But now something's happening where I've changed. I've went in a new direction, and I'm working with a lot of light fixtures, and the work is very, it's like light and dark, and so it's very, very different aesthetically. And I feel like I can't show them together. So it's, I'm kind of in a different realm right now with that, where I've always kind of been able to play, but now it's like, oh gosh, I got to get all this done in time so I have enough work to show at this gallery. So I think it's okay to kind of go back and forth with how you set up things, and don't be afraid to like show older work, because even though like that, like that's a piece that you showed here, but this place hasn't seen that piece, so sometimes, yeah, just using old pieces and putting it with something new is kind of like my favorite thing to do. So,
yeah, it's interesting you brought up like that idea of like when to stop showing work, or what work is too old, because like I think that's something that in the contemporary art world has changed a lot, because there used to be more of like a set idea about that outside of retrospectives, which is what you're doing. But does anyone have a question? And if people in the audience have a question, I'll repeat your question so it's mic'd. And if you don't have questions, I have a lot more questions. But I would love to get questions.
So outside of physical mediums, are there any digital tools that y'all use for planning or execution?
Okay, so they were asking outside of traditional like material processes, is anyone using digital processes? Which I think is obvious Sarah's using a lot and stuff, but you guys can answer too.
well, yeah, I've mostly been using like the equivalent to making a lamp. So doing all different sconces and stuff, but a lot of I've kind of had to become a semi-electrician with the last stuff. But in teaching, I do 3D printing, and we're doing CNC routing and laser etching, both Doug and I. So I think that's a lot, but that I do that for my students. I don't necessarily find it to be very helpful for me, because I have to have hands-on materials, and hands-on keyboard doesn't work for me. I don't like that. It's just not me. And I a lot of the students love it, and that's great, and that's their flow. But for me, it doesn't really work. But there's times where I'm like, I could be so much more efficient if I learned how to do this in the computer and had a thing printed off. But instead, I'd rather make a mold and like do it myself and over again. Maybe it's like torture, self-torture. I don't know.
You were asking in the planning stages, the digital, or
Planning, execution, the whole of your creative practice.
Yeah.
Curious about how digital or how technology improving over time has impacted your creative.
I think even just something as simple as being able to photograph and look at the photograph of what the work looks like. I mean, I think we all are sort of affected by today, even though as a lot of us are much more touch. Probably all of them, all right here, need the physicality, and that I think another generation, is not going to need as much. Or maybe we do, because there are a lot of things coming back that are everything from vinyl records to.
Could you imagine having to do slides now? It's insane. Like 2 rolls of slide film for one sculpture was what I did my whole undergrad. And it was a lot. It was expensive.
There were
You're
some
right.
other
It was like,
questions.
ooh.
There's another one. Liza.
I was wondering if you could talk about sort of how the motivation in your career, how that changes with age, like in terms of what is motivating you in the studio. And then
Oh, Lord.
And then like when you're working on very large projects and you're facing problems, what keeps you motivated to continue to solve those problems?
I'll start
So
with this.
Liza was asking,
Yeah.
like, how has age affected the process in studio practice? And then also, like, when we do have a mountain to climb, what keeps us motivated? And I will say I have an amazing community in Alabama that I can rely on, and I'm very grateful for that.
I mean,
I-
Daisie probably has had the most life-changing, right?
Maybe. With age, or we're talking about age. I don't know. I guess. Can you repeat the question?
Well, basically, how has age affected your evolution as an artist? Like, how has that changed over the career?
Because now you're working
Yeah.
with your children,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
you know.
I think it's comforting, I guess, in the fact that the idea of age, even the idea that we would have another chance, like again the next day. So the idea of time or age, just overall is very comforting for me. So I guess that's kind of in itself what I'm interested in. And the idea of kind of these small things that repeat, like the breath and like the breathing, or the heartbeat, like these really small things that maybe we don't think about. So to me, that helps me, I guess, with a bigger arc of aging, maybe, is the small aging, and the small moments, and then that helps me be able to handle the big moments. The idea of kind of breaking it down to smaller cycles. And then when I do have something challenging, my favorite thing to do is to add something else to the list. And I guess by that I mean, like, if you feel overwhelmed, you're like, what should I start? How do I finish? What do I get around this? To me, it's just really exciting to look at other deadlines or other shows I could apply for. And that seems kind of backwards, but I can remember, I guess, like, back in high school, I was really excited about the idea of a job. And I thought, man, when people get jobs, this must just be so exciting. You don't go to school anymore, you have this job. So I remember, like, reading the want ads in the paper. And those jobs, a lot of them, it seemed like, well, I could do these, like there was no kind of prerequisites. Like, yeah, you just come in and apply. And I love that. So I remember eating my breakfast, like, reading the want ads in the paper for all these amazing jobs. And that kind of was very satisfying and exciting for me. So I guess just the idea of, I always try to get back to that kind of excitement of, like, I can do anything that I want. So I'm the one that's setting this up for myself. And if I don't like where I'm at now, I can change it, and I can keep adding more jobs to my plate in the best way.
So I would say problems. So I'm just say if it's an atrium or a big show or something like that, and they're real problems, it gives you a great energy because it makes you nervous, and I actually don't mind being nervous. I think it just gives you energy, and it pushes you, and to do something that you might not be able to do. So that, and I always try to remind myself that this is the good life when I'm so nervous, and but that is part of it. And I think I think I work pretty hard still. And so,
especially for somebody that's that old.
Excuse me, but Doug keeps reminding me how old I am.
we tease each other. I'm only in my 60s, so I'm not that old.
No.
But it is, Liza, that's such a great question, because like when I was a young artist of like 24 or 25, like it used to be like museums or galleries would see your work and be like, oh, it's installation based, and like they would have so many questions. And now I don't get asked those questions anymore. And I don't think it's because I'm like a known commodity. I think the idea of expanded practice is has more gravity, which I think is great, because I don't think of museums as safe spaces at all. like especially for like LGBTQ people like me and a lot of other populations, it's not a safe space. But I do appreciate like that they let me do what I want to do in my own language, which is cool.
And that's that question about you're a painter or you're,
Yeah.
sculptor or whatever. And when I went graduate school as a painter, and one of the questions at the end was, you're not a painter or a sculptor, you're not going to get a job. And it just, I think we've gone past that. We've done it.
I think we're at our time limit, but obviously you can come at any of us with any questions and we'll hang out for a while. And it was great being here today. Thank you so much. Yeah, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And met Sharon in Charlottesville.
Yes, I know. I feel like we've known each other longer than that, but we haven't. So I've been in Charlottesville for almost, I guess, 25 years, maybe even a little longer. But I grew up in West Virginia, in a small town, and then went to undergrad in a couple different places. I went to VCU. I went to San Francisco Art Institute for a brief moment.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And then I finished in Atlanta at the Atlanta College of Art, which is now SCAD, but I lived, and I liked it better when it was ACA. But anyway, I lived in Atlanta for about 6 years altogether, got married, had a child, and then we moved to Charlottesville. Then we split up, and I've been in Charlottesville and got remarried to my husband now 13 years ago. And we have a big blended family of all adult kids. But so yeah, it was interesting to hear, I think it was Daisie, talk about the complexities of life and how they just inform your work so much. And I totally agree with that. Like, I've actually never been able to successfully keep my personal life in a way. I mean, I don't think it's like right out there on the surface of the work, but it all informs the work. Like, I think the way you live, the way you, the things that go through your mind, the things you think about, children, breakups, relationships, death, loss, it's all part of my work, for sure. In fact, the favorite thing that was ever said to me about my work is that when I was at the one semester I went to San Francisco Art Institute, I was there in the 1990, and it was when I'm a painter and collage art. My practice is versatile, but it was when minimalism was really in, and like the slick surface, and I was doing these figurative paintings, and I felt like I wasn't getting any feedback. I was just kind of being ignored. And I was really frustrated, so I went to the dean of the students and I told him what I felt. He said, well, let me come and look at your work. I'll look at it, So he looked at it, and my favorite thing he said, he looked at the 3 paintings, and I was doing sort of collage, like David Sally-ish imagery with like all these different things happening. And he was like, if nothing else ever happens to you in your life, you have enough to make art about. So you don't need to worry about that. Like, that's fine. You've got that down. And I'm like, so that it's one of those things that's always like felt good to me. Because all that's important.
I remember one studio visit. So we're very lucky that our studios
Really close.
Yeah, are pretty close, and that I'll have sort of a art problem, and I'll say, Sharon, I need you to come over. Come look at what I'm doing. And I think there was one time when we were sort of thinking about showing together, and you said, tell me about the 3 things it means to be a Southern artist. That I think is so great.
Yes.
And you said, your work qualifies. And they
Yes.
are...
Now I can't remember. Okay. Artifice. Narrative, artifice.
Uh-huh.
I think that was on storytelling.
And yeah, so
It might have been
storytelling.
more than 3, but artifice in the best way. Because, I mean, painting is artifice. I mean, it just is. You're using the surface to tell about something beneath that. And you're also creating something out of nothing. So but also Southern hospitality and all of that. We know the cunning, gentility and stuff.
And
which I
there's
love.
something really interesting about being from the Deep South, of which I am and had lived in Mississippi for a long time, and then moving to Charlottesville, which is technically the South, and being able to kind of see things from a distance, but still being able to, so still sort of having that kind of connection, but really being able to look at it from a little bit of a distance has been really interesting. So it's been really lovely to be back in Alabama, and it's been a long time since I've had a show here. So I'm really thankful to Ray.
I know.
Yeah.
It's been great. Like we sort of, put some proposals out in the world, and this was like a couple years ago. This has been in the works for a while, and it seems so far away. And then we're like, oh my gosh, it's happening. Like in November, we were like, we need to get everything together. And we had just shown some of this work together in New York at an art fair, which was a really completely different experience. But it's really fun to see it in this big space.
Yeah, it's been really wonderful.
Yeah.
So come talk to us. We'll be here. So thank you.
Thank you so much for coming.